Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today of Do I Have to Love Myself First? Exploring romantic relationships in the context of eating disorders. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Erin Byerly, and I'm your Alumni Services Coordinator, and I'll be your moderator for today's online presentation. So I would like to now introduce you to today's presenter. Ashley Moser, LMFT CEDS, is a clinical education specialist at the Renfrew Centers. Ashley received her bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and her master's degree in marriage and family therapy from Northwestern University. Ashley has extensive experience in providing family therapy and clinical supervision with a focus in the treatment of eating disorders and co-occurring mood disorders. Ashley is a frequent speaker on the topics of body image, evidence-based treatment of eating disorders, and engaging families in the treatment process. So I will now turn it over to Ashley to get on with today's webinar.
Thank you so much, Erin. And thanks so much to everyone who took time out of their busy day to join us to talk about what I hope will be a really exciting kickstart to what is really important aspect of eating disorder treatment and recovery. We talk so much about eating disorders being disorders of disconnection. And so we can imagine that if we're feeling disconnected from ourselves, we oftentimes end up feeling really disconnected from other people. And we know that disconnection is a real vulnerability to mental health and eating disorders. So it's sort of this cycle that's really, really challenging. So today we're going to talk specifically about a topic that I'm not sure we've really covered a ton in our alumni webinar recovery series, which is talking about the intersection of eating disorders and romantic relationships. Because this is such a big topic, my agenda is kind of short, as you can see. So I've got two main focuses for us for this afternoon. And I did that purposely because this is such a big topic. I want to make sure that everyone today isn't just getting a general landscape. We know eating disorders impact relationships and vice versa. And I don't want to spend a lot of time just going over the broad strokes of what you already know. I want you to understand those pieces, but I also then want you to leave with a skill set that makes you feel like you can bring some of what you've learned in treatment, what you've learned from today's webinar, and bring those into your relationships, especially those romantic relationships or desire for romantic relationships, so that you feel like you have a good takeaway, some solid footing, and some next steps. So agenda is straightforward in the sense that we're going to talk about challenges of romantic relationships when there's an eating disorder in the picture. And we're also going to talk about applying learned skills. One of the things that I want to start with is to just sort of set some expectations for today's webinar. So the topic of romantic relationships and eating disorders is a really big topic to cover. As you can imagine, we're probably not going to get through every facet of this conversation in the time that we have together today. So I want to set that expectation that we're not going to cover it all. There's going to be so much left to do, and today will still be valuable with takeaways. I also want to put out there that relationships are really complex. Relationships really exist on a spectrum and are totally defined by the people who are living in them. So I'm going to use the term romantic relationships to really try to be an umbrella for multiple forms of relationships. Relationships don't just look like two people anymore. Relationships don't just look like two people of different genders anymore. There's so many more ways to be in relationship and to be in a romantic relationship with another person or other people these days. And so I want to just expand what we want to think about and how we're talking about relationships so that there's an inclusive lens brought on today's conversation. I also acknowledge that a lot of what we're going to be talking about is some of the hard and difficult and potential pain points of being in relationships. So I don't want to not also acknowledge that being in relationships is wonderful too. That relationships may not be easy and they may involve a range of difficult emotions, and especially in the eating disorder recovery process can bring up a lot of conflict. However, relationships are still absolutely worth it. Connection is a huge predictor of overall emotional and physical well-being and can be greatly, greatly important to overall well-being, health, physical health, emotional health, and mental health. So we're going to talk about the hard points of relationships today, but I also don't want you to take away that relationships are hard and I should stay away, or this is going to bring a lot up for me and it should be something to be avoided. So we're going to talk about the hard things, but we're also going to talk about why relationships are just so important to our overall well-being and healing. So with those caveats and those expectations set, let's dive in. So I chose the title for today's webinar because I hear this message a lot, and whether it's through like social media and Instagram therapists or just in like common everyday conversation, there's this belief that you need to love yourself before you can love someone else. In theory, I get that, right? Like you've got to have a good sense of what love means and how that applies to you before you can then bring in another person to this conversation and to this aspect of your life. But I also want to stop and pause and question, like, is this true? Is this something that's actually the case? Because if it's the case, I think there's a lot of people, a lot of us out there that may have to stop and pause and say, oh gosh, am I ready for a relationship? Can I be in a relationship if this is true? Do you really have to love yourself before you can love someone else? Do you really have to be the partner you want to attract? Can you really expect someone else to love you if you don't love yourself? I guess I want to question, just at the onset of this conversation, is this true? Is this valid? And is this just a simplification or potentially some messaging that could create some more challenges down the road? These messages are coming at us from a lot of different places. So I mentioned the social media Instagram therapist aspect. As you'll see, social media is on here, but there's also a lot of other places where messages about romantic relationships are very, very prevalent. So here are some of those places. We know in the media, there's a lot of messages out there that are about diet culture, weight stigma, ageism, that are all very, very prevalent. We also know that in social media, there's a lot of ability to compare ourselves to others, and we have so much more awareness of other people's relationship statuses than we ever did. I've seen a lot of things on social media and memes that really, identify how involved we are in other people's relationships now because of social media, like those beliefs that if you notice that someone's picture is oftentimes taken off of someone's Instagram or taken off of someone's social media platform, you're then doing a deep dive to figure out what happened. Did they break up? What's going on? When prior to social media, if a relationship ended, you wouldn't have that direct access, you wouldn't have that direct knowledge. It would be a very different process. So I just acknowledge that there's a lot of pressure with social media in terms of comparison and in terms of they're just feeling like there's a magnifying glass or a spotlight on the details of our lives, especially our relationship status and romantic relationship experiences. I also want to say that based on the community that you identify with, there could be a lot of systemic pressures and messages being sent about romantic relationships as well. This can vary based on region, race, culture, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender. There may be a lot of beliefs about romantic relationships that you're receiving based on where you live and how you identify. And as a marriage and family therapist, I would be remiss to not mention also the systemic pressures that families can also place on romantic relationships. There can be a lot of awareness of the generational patterns that come through families. I'm sure most people can identify how old their mom was when they got married. And so because of this, there can be that comparison. Well, my mom was, in her early 20s when she was married. I'm not married and I'm in my early 30s. What does that say about me? What does that mean? I'm not doing what was expected from me. I'm showing up to family gatherings and I'm single, or I'm recently separated, or I'm in a relationship that my family may not understand. I am then going to be open to maybe some exposure to judgment or criticism from lack of understanding. So there's a lot of pressure and a lot of different systemic layers when there comes to pressures and messages that we receive about romantic relationships and how badly we are supposed to need them, want to be in them. But then we're also getting these messages that we need to love ourselves, heal ourselves before we get there. So how do we have that disconnect? We need to be in these relationships. They're so important from all of these different perspectives. But if we're not necessarily in a strong place with our self-worth, self-esteem, self-confidence, it feels like it's going to be a mismatch, or we have all this work to do before we can get there. So I want to acknowledge that pressure exists, and that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. I think, when I think about all of the different problems there are with some of the messages that we receive about the importance of romantic relationships and what it means to either be in or not be in those romantic relationships, I think there's this underlying belief that you need to be something else than what you are in order to be lovable. So if you're getting all this pressure to be in a relationship, to be moving forward in that aspect of your life, but you need to love yourself first and work on yourself first, it sort of sends this message that you're not lovable as you are, that if you struggle with anything, you need to change those things to be able to love, accept, see yourself in a good light before you can then be lovable, worthy to someone else. So I think a lot of people fill in this blank with the word thin. When I talk with folks who are, in various shades of eating disorder and eating disorder recovery, that word shows up a lot. There's a very specific belief out there that that thin ideal is what needs to be achieved in order to be lovable, in order to be worthy, in order to be seen as attractive. And that is such a vulnerability, whether you struggle with an eating disorder or you don't, to the development or maintenance of disordered eating. Because if you have to look a certain way in order to be worthy of love, to be worthy of connection, to be worthy of being chosen, boy, does that put pressure. I think there are other pieces and other things that people fill in this blank with as well, though. You need to be attractive, and thin and attractive, I think, get intermixed sometimes, but I do think they are different. I think there's also this sense that you need to be really easygoing, very nonchalant, no big deal, nothing bothers me, very aloof, which to me reads not needy, but everybody has needs. Disconnecting from our needs in order to be lovable is a recipe for mental health concerns, especially disordered eating. And I think another piece that people fill in this blank with, especially this thought that if I need to love myself first before I can love someone else, I have to heal myself. I need to do the work and get better before I'm worthy and ready for love. If you have to be healed in order to be loved, I think there's going to be a real discrepancy between those timelines matching up. As we know, healing is not linear. As we know, progress and sustainable change is not linear. It's a process. And so because of that, we need to be conscious that this message could force us to feel like it's this all or nothing. When I'm healed, I'll be ready. When I'm not healed, I'm not ready. And I don't think it's that straightforward. But I guess what I want to really highlight and take away from this, aspect of the presentation today is that these messages really set up a dynamic and an underlying belief and a message that is very likely to increase vulnerability to disordered eating and maintenance of an eating disorder that's already in place. And this shows up in this context of romantic relationships in particular. So now I want to talk about some specific challenges that we see showing up depending on where you are in state of relationship. This is not, exclusive. This is not all of the categories that exist when it comes to relationships. There's lots of nuances. And like I said, relationships are very much on a continuum and can be very fluid. But here are some of the ones that are maybe the most easily recognizable. And I think we can just acknowledge that there are vulnerabilities in these different stages, sometimes different vulnerabilities that can contribute to this belief that you need to change something about yourself in order to be lovable. And it shows up differently depending on where you are in the state of your relationship. I work with a lot of women who are single, dating, and then committed and, returning to the dating scene, relationship-wise, those statuses. And these are some of the things that I've heard over my time. In terms of being single, the online dating and dating app aspect is something that is really, really challenging to navigate, regardless of disordered eating or body image concerns. Online dating and dating apps are very appearance focused. It's literally a picture of you, and someone says yes or no based on what they see. Do you read the details? Sure. Is there more information depending on what site and what app you're using? Sure. But it's very appearance focused. So that desire to look attractive, to look like what you think someone would be attracted to and want, is very heightened during this time period. And that continues while you're in, whether it's dating apps or in dating in person, that desire to be desired, that desire to be seen as attractive. And a lot of the times that attractiveness equates to that thin ideal, to look your best by also having your weight and your body size be what you consider to be best, which in today's society has been more of that thin ideal. There's a lot of pressure to be chosen. And then there's this belief that if you see someone who is single, there's this question that comes up, whether it's family, friends, media, whatever, what's wrong with them? If you're single and you're not with someone else, there must be something inherently wrong. And how is that productive for anyone? But it's an special vulnerability as you're in this single process of feeling like I have to be chosen. I have all this pressure to be chosen, have my appearance put me in a position to be chosen. And if I'm not, there's this belief that there's something wrong with me. So how can I fix what people see? How can I fix myself to fit a mold, what people might want so that they can choose me? When we move into dating, that aspect continues to perpetuate with this desire to be chosen for a more committed relationship. So deciding to be exclusive or exciting to have it be a relationship that's going to be something that continues on. But a lot of dating involves food-focused and movement-focused activities. There's a lot of going to get coffee. There's a lot of going to get drinks. There's a lot of eating that occurs. And there's a lot of dating that goes on around that. So the thought of going on a date and eating disorder treatment, recovery, various stages of eating disorder recovery, that can be incredibly anxiety provoking. It's anxiety provoking to go on a date, to meet someone new, to do those processes, but to also then have to incorporate dining out at a restaurant and managing intake, as well as managing movement. Let's say somebody wants to go hiking, somebody wants to go to the beach. How do I navigate how I feel about myself, my body, my relationship with food? How do I bring that into this relationship and navigate that while I'm also trying to navigate this part of this dating process? When there's dating, there's also this question about vulnerability, intimacy from an emotional and physical perspective. What does that look like? What am I comfortable with? If I'm feeling insecure, how does that show up? Do I want to close myself off? Am I fearful of being hurt? And how does that show up? There's also this sense of individual versus couple identity. People really go into the dating process wanting to preserve a sense of who they are in themselves. They don't want to just become part of the couple and take on that relationship. They don't want to compromise and lose themselves, but they want to also hold on to a sense of who they are. How does that influence relationship with food and body? I think it does a lot. And the next two specific stages we'll talk about, and some of the specific challenges, are through more committed relationships and also divorce or re-entering the dating scene, for lack of a better term. So in the committed category, there's a lot of messages out there about maintaining relationships that do circle around weight, intimacy, aging, that in order to keep your partner happy, in order to sustain a happy relationship, that you need to manage your physical appearance so that they don't become unattracted or want to wander. There's this thought that if you are going through the natural aging process, that you need to fight that in order to continue to maintain and meet those ideals that, diet culture and ageism culture really sort of perpetuate. In committed relationships, we also see relationships serving more of a function as being an emotional home base. Emotional intimacy is really important in these relationships. And sometimes it may be really important, but may not be there. And that's an aspect to consider. But feeling seen, heard, and validated in committed relationships is something that becomes really important. How does this person be a support to me emotionally? And how do I support them emotionally? And for some, that transition to parenthood, if that's a choice that is made, that can be an incredibly huge stressor on our relationship, as well as in terms of how we feel about ourselves and our bodies. When we look at people who have ended a relationship and are looking to return to dating, return to relationship seeking, there's a lot of feelings of, I was unsuccessful. Does that mean that I failed? If I now had this relationship that wasn't successful, do I now have baggage? What does aging then look like for me? When I was dating originally, I was younger. Am I still as desirable, attractive? Am I going to pull the type of partner that I want? Who's available? Who's out there? How do I bring my family together with this other person? So a lot of really significant challenges that can come forward depending on where you are in the relationship status that you currently hold or hope to hold. These challenges continue to exist because relationships bring up challenges. And I think that's where some of those messages about having to love yourself first in order to be in a relationship come up, because there's this belief that if I just loved myself first, these things wouldn't matter. But I'm here to tell you that these things exist regardless of how you feel about yourself and are challenges that have to be met. So we've heard what the media says, we've heard what social media says, we've heard what families say, and we've heard what the general consensus is about different statuses of relationships. But what does the research say? So I will say that research does suggest that feeling worthless or having low self-esteem does ultimately interfere with relationships. And I think we can ultimately understand and get on board with that idea. But here are some of the reasons why, because I think sometimes we just stop there, and I want to understand why. These 3 bullet points really stood out to me. So those who question their own self-worth are more likely to anxiously expect and be monitoring their partner's behaviors for signs that they are not actually worthy. And so they may interpret like very benign or neutral acts as hostile or rejecting. So if we feel like we are not a good person, or if we feel like we are not worthy of being loved or accepted, we are much more likely to see situations and interpret them as confirming those beliefs. We're going to talk more about what we do with that, because I think that's a big one. And we're going to give you some actionable steps for that as we continue to talk. We also know that those with negative self-views are sometimes drawn to those who also see them that way, and that is negatively. So low self-esteem is also linked with feeling like you deserve happiness less, and could also lead you to tolerate being in not so healthy and unsupportive relationships for even longer. And people with low self-esteem tend to underestimate their partner's love and view their partner in more negative terms because they can't believe that a good person could love them. And so they're much more likely to report less satisfaction in their relationship, less optimism, and ultimately don't necessarily end up rejecting a lot of advances of showing compliments, love, affection, because they can't trust that what's being shown to them is real, is true, is honest, because that's not what they've either ever experienced or truly believe about how they feel. So the research does confirm that low self-esteem and worthlessness does interfere with relationships. It doesn't mean that you have to love yourself before you can be in one, but it is helpful to know that these pieces do have an impact on relationship health. And we know that eating disorders, because as we talked about at the top, are disorders of disconnection and have influences on relationships. That eating disorders, we know, can have impact on relationships as well. And instead of just saying that as a blanket statement, here are some of the reasons why. Disordered eating can sometimes be seen in those who have a history of people pleasing. That I want you to be happy before I want me to be happy. And I'm going to put your needs and your desires over my own. And I'm going to restrict what I need and what I want. There can be isolating and shutting down, and that can be in response of tolerating uncomfortable emotions. Again, that denial of needs. There can be some comparison with other relationships or even past partners. You may be more prone to compare your relationship to someone else's to try to determine, is it good enough? Or you may compare all of your relationships to your past partners or even your partner's past partners. Again, those connection-based activities can be surrounding food and movement, as we talked about in dating. There's a lot of opportunities for food and movement to be a part of that process. How do I have a relationship if those things are a challenge for me? Are there other ways to derive connection that do not have to surround food and movement? Obviously, we can imagine body image and intimacy can be a challenge, both emotionally and physically. We know that the aging process and diet culture have a really interesting, intersection in that we want to remain and fight the natural aging process, which sometimes does mean that our bodies does change, our weight does increase, our skin begins to sag, our hormones begin to shift. And that is a specific challenge that we see here. We know that sometimes vulnerability with disordered eating can be a co-occurring issue as well. It can be really challenging to share and be open and be vulnerable with another person, even with ourselves, because tolerating those uncomfortable emotions and risking discomfort and hurt and rejection is really scary. And there can be a rejecting of those compliments. And again, it may be because you feel like people are being dishonest because that's not how you see yourself or how anyone's ever spoken to you or seen you before. So the combination of what the research says, what messages we receive, and the challenges specific to eating disorders make this combination of eating disorders in romantic relationships important for us to be talking about today. But again, there is hope. There are things we can do. And that's what we're going to segment into next, because I can imagine this might be how you're feeling as I'm talking right now. So, oh my gosh, am I doomed? I am resonating with all of this. I've heard all of these messages. I, have had these messages from my family. I'm in this stage of dating and I've struggled with disordered eating. So what does this mean for me? Am I doomed? No, absolutely not. But I will say, to try to lighten it up, I did put in some interesting social media ads to sort of help, exemplify that I think there's a lot of people, in the world trying to navigate this, that there's a lot of awareness that, oh gosh, like relationships can be really hard, can be really challenging. And I also want to do something about them because ultimately, even though this is hard, we know that connection and relationships can also be incredibly healing. So now we're going to move from identifying why it's so hard to what can we do about it. Also, am I doomed? Part 2. Again, absolutely not. And this is where your skills from treatment come in handy. I'm making the assumption that everyone I'm speaking to today has been in Renfrew treatment to some capacity. So because of this, I have a very strong inkling that the majority of you will know exactly what I'm talking about. Our UT skills, those unified treatment skills that you learned in treatment to help navigate that relationship with food, are actually the same skills that we can bring into and apply to relationships. So today, instead of me teaching you brand new skills that are going to absolutely revolutionize and change all of your relationships, which, hey, maybe some of it will, that'd be cool. But there's going to be some, instead of doing that, we're going to say, let's go back and look at what we do know. Let's go back and look at what you have learned and how can we bring it into this facet of life? Because we know that this is really important. We know that connection is important. We know that disconnection is a true vulnerability for eating disorders and can be a maintaining factor for eating disorders. We want to give you some skills that you already have and tweak them and make them applicable to this section of life, because this will help maintain health overall. So what we know to be true about eating disorders, a quick review. We know that eating disorders are emotional disorders. So while there's, that overarching belief and, that's false and misinformation out there that it's just about food and weight, we know that that is not the case, that it is far more about tolerating and managing uncomfortable emotions. And I'm sure I'm not the first person to tell you this, but it is very true that romantic relationships can result in a rise in distressing or uncomfortable emotions. And I've got a little picture right here to say, unresolved trauma and attachment wounds really do reveal themselves in romantic relationships. So there's going to be aspects of our trauma, our attachment, our lived experiences that shows up in romantic relationships, because that's the nature of what romantic relationships do. They shine a light on those parts of ourselves that still need some healing. That doesn't mean you have to heal before you get there, but you can heal along with it. And a part of what we need to understand about that is that because we know that romantic relationships can shine a light on those things, there's going to be more uncomfortable emotions. Not a bad thing, but we need to know what to do with them. And we need to know that we can disconnect the desire to use the eating disorder to manage those uncomfortable emotions. So how do eating disorders function in romantic relationships? Obviously, we know that they serve as a great distraction. Eating disorders can pull our time, our energy, our mental resources away from uncomfortable situations, which allows us to be able to function. And this can happen in relationships. There can be hard stuff that's being triggered, brought up. However, I don't have to feel it as much if I'm engaged in the eating disorder. It really turns the volume down on those uncomfortable emotions and gives me something else to think about, focus on, and pull myself away from. We also know eating disorders serve as a way to disconnect. And sometimes being in connection while being disconnected feels safe. I know a lot of people that are in relationship but keep distance because they don't want to get hurt. The eating disorder can step in and be a great way to make that happen. And again, eating disorder can function in romantic relationships to manage uncomfortable emotions. The other piece that we've already talked about too is that eating disorders can function as a way to appear lovable. I'm attracted, I'm desirable, people will choose me, they'll keep choosing me, they won't leave me as long as I don't have emotions, I don't have needs, and I stay thin, and I manage my weight. The eating disorder obviously is a great way to sort of meet all of those things. It can disconnect you from how you're feeling. It can turn you inward and can also try to change your weight and try to manage that piece. And so because of that, the eating disorder can function in those ways. The other piece that I want to talk about is that I have heard a lot of folks talk over the years about eating disorders function as almost like a partner. That when we think about and we externalize eating disorder as like a thing or something that's outside of us, that there are some people who really, identify and jive with that way of looking at this. And because of that, I think the eating disorder can sometimes function as the most reliable, dependable person experience thing in their life. If they've never had someone that was going to show up and be reliable, consistent, and dependable, boy, eating disorders can be that thing. And so it can meet a lot of needs that maybe have never been met in relationships. And maybe that's part of why it was developed in the first place, that the eating disorder may have developed out of a sense of like, I have all these needs and no one in my life can help me meet them. And this is how I'm going to function. That may be possible. I've also heard that the eating disorder can also function as a partner in other ways. So I have had a client that I've worked with in the past. And one of the conversations we had at one point was that the eating disorder really served as like her partner in circumstances where she was alone. So she was always the third wheel, the fifth wheel, the seventh wheel, the 11th wheel, and would ultimately find herself going to a lot of functions by herself. And that felt really, really uncomfortable. And the eating disorder sort of stepped in and it almost became the thing she went home to. So everyone went home with their partners. Everyone went home with the people that they were dating. She went home to her eating disorder. And that felt like it was meeting a need. And almost to some degree, that felt better than having to be in a relationship because it was consistent, reliable. It was just something that was predictable, but that almost filled that need of a partner. I'm not alone. I don't have to go home alone. I'm going home to something. And that was a function of the eating disorder at that point. So I share that in case that's an aspect of how that may function for you too. So if we understand that this is function, that we know that the eating disorder functions these ways in relationships, what are we going to do about this? Now, this is where your treatment skills come to play. I'm sure you've all experienced or have talked about or have had exposure to the downward arrow. So the downward arrow is not a feel-good skill. It's typically a skill that most people are not super excited about in their treatment journey. But I bring it up here because I think it's really important for us when we're thinking about what do I do now that I've identified that this is a bit of a vulnerability and a challenge for me, how do I proceed? Going back to the downward arrow in terms of relationships is incredibly, incredibly important. And I think it's a good place to start, even though it's probably one of the hardest places to start. A lot of the automatic appraisals that we tell ourselves about ourselves in relationships with other people, so whether we're single, dating, committed, or otherwise, the automatic appraisal that we have about what we need to be in order to be lovable typically has some pretty significant roots. So if we're fearful that if I gain weight, I will no longer be lovable, that feels like it's just a complete sentence for some folks. But if we know that we need to kind of dive deeper and understand this more and really get to its root, the downward arrow is a great place to do that. I do this a lot, and I think it's really beneficial because there's that belief that if I gain weight, I will no longer be lovable. It has so much more roots than that. It means if I gain weight, I'll no longer be lovable. And that means I won't have the family that I want in the future. It means that I'll be alone. It means that I'll never find someone. It means that I am who my family always said I was. There's so many deep-seated beliefs. And so this was a quick refresher that when we start with that automatic appraisal, we want to dive deeper. What would happen if this were true? What would happen next until we get down to the core belief? Here are some of the core beliefs I hear the most often when it comes to core beliefs in romantic relationships, that ultimately underneath the automatic appraisal that I'm not lovable as I am, or I need to lose weight, or if I gain weight, I won't be lovable in this relationship. Ultimately at the core, there's a belief that I'm unlovable as I am, that I'm going to end up alone, that I'm not worthy or deserving of love, that I'm inherently bad, or something is wrong or broken within me. These beliefs have a huge impact on our ability to be in relationship. So it's not that just because you have these, you can't be in a relationship, but it makes it challenging, and it makes being in relationship something to have to navigate. Because when these core beliefs get activated, we tend to sort of wear a lens, right? So we have a lens that kind of comes up and like pops up over our eyes, and we tend to have that confirmation bias. So when we get down to this core belief and we think that I am going to die and end up alone, When we're in a situation in a relationship where we feel activated, we feel like we've been triggered, that lens pops up and we see more evidence to support what we know to be true, which is that I'm going to end up alone. And if you're walking around and seeing yourself, your partner, your relationship through that lens, that's going to increase your emotional experience and drive some pretty not great behaviors and thought patterns. So this is a really important skill and tool to be utilizing to say, when I'm activated in my relationship, when I'm having thoughts about my weight influencing my worth in my relationship, how do I dive deeper to understand what are these core beliefs and how do they influence me? Where they tend to influence us, again, is that automatic appraisal. That lens pops up and we have that confirmation bias. We see what we want to see and we see things that confirm the belief that we are not lovable and not worthy. So going back to what the research had stated at the beginning, which is that those who question their own self-worth are more likely to vigilantly monitor their parent or their partner's behaviors for signs of it. This is one of those things that can be actively addressed through the appraisal and reappraisal aspect. So we know that our automatic beliefs are connected to and driven by our core beliefs, that we automatically see situations because of how we have interpreted ourselves and the core beliefs that we have about ourselves. So we're going to be much more likely to fall into those thinking traps. I'm guessing you guys are remembering that from treatment as well. This is that cognitive flexibility piece. We're more likely when we're activated and our core beliefs pop up to overestimate the likelihood of the situation confirming our core belief that we're unlovable. And we're more likely to believe that the worst case situation is going to happen, that this person now knows that I'm unlovable and they're going to leave me and I'm going to be alone forever. Those thought processes, as you can imagine, drive some pretty strong emotions. So we need to pay attention to when the core belief is activating how we see the situation, and how we see the situation is most likely going to be a thinking trap that makes it feel so much bigger than what it actually is in the moment. So I want to talk about reappraisals, not from a place of trying to change how you feel, but from a place of cognitive flexibility and benefit of the doubt. So I'm going to go over a few scenarios that I think are pretty common in romantic relationships that really illuminate the difference between automatic appraisals and trying to apply some of this reappraisals. So here are some of the top 4 that I think I hear most regularly: not responding to texts, always on the phone, not initiating physical intimacy, and ignoring requests for help with shared responsibilities. These are scenarios that tend to be pretty activating and challenging for couples to navigate. And so let's take a look at this through this lens of automatic appraisals and reappraisals. So on the left, you'll see automatic appraisal of these situations and of these circumstances and scenarios. So if we think about this person not texting us back, our automatic appraisal is that they're not interested in us. That's potentially driven by that belief that we're going to die and end up alone. However, that's still the first place our brain goes. They don't like me. They don't want to be with me. They're not interested. If we try to ask ourselves what else could be possible here, that's where the reappraisal comes in. So our automatic appraisal could be that they don't like us, they don't want anything to do with us, and they're done. However, what else could be possible in this situation? If someone doesn't respond to a text message, what else could be happening? They could be busy. They could be driving. They could be at work. They could be in a movie. There's lots of other things that could be happening. The likelihood of it being the worst case scenario or the thing that confirms your core belief, it feels like that automatic appraisal is more true because it's the one that hits you right here. It's the one that confirms what you think to be true about people and their relationships with you. But these other possibilities allow for the benefit of the doubt. And we're just asking what else could be possible instead of jumping to conclusions and assuming that they don't want anything to do with you. What else could be possible? Same thing when it comes to this person who's constantly on their phone. They're not making eye contact. They're, out to dinner, but they're in their phone the whole time. They're not really spending quality time because they're really distracted and using their phone. The automatic appraisal could be that they're rejecting you, that they choose the phone, they choose the interaction, they choose the other person that they're talking to over you. What else could it be? What else could be true? What gives this person the benefit of the doubt? They could be distracted. There could be breaking news. There could be some news that they're, being informed of by their friends and family. They could be really zoned out and engaging in a lot of scrolling and screen time as a way to regulate their emotional experience. That's a huge emotionally driven behavior. But we want to ask ourselves, what else is possible? We also want to think about the situation in which someone's not initiating physical intimacy in the relationship, if that's a part of the relationship. Our automatic appraisal is that they're not attracted to me anymore. They don't want to be with me. Maybe that's the automatic appraisal that's the most feels like it's true because it's connected to that core belief that I'm going to end up alone. But there could also be other things going on. This could be someone that's been really busy with work. This could be someone who really needs some more time for physical and emotional connection first. This may be someone who has different values about physical intimacy and romantic relationships. There could be so much else going on there. And same with someone who is not participating in shared household responsibilities. I hear about this one a lot. They must be selfish and lazy, and they don't respect me, and they think that I'm, here to clean up after them. Versus maybe this is someone who's really struggling overall with emotional or mental health and is in need of rest. Maybe this is someone who needs directive feedback and needs to be told, this is what I need you to do. I need your help. We need to sit down and set expectations. And there's a conversation that needs to be had. But again, these automatic appraisals are driven by the core beliefs. Reappraisals are allowing for the benefit of the doubt for the other person, that it may not always be the worst case scenario. There may be something else going on here. So the next piece of, treatment flashback historical information I want to share with you is emotion-driven behaviors and alternative actions. So we know that our core beliefs drive the situation or how we see the situation, which then is going to drive what we do behaviorally. What I know about emotion-driven behaviors is that they tend to lead to disconnection in relationships. When we shut down, when we isolate, when we withdraw, when we lash out, when we distract ourselves, when we assume the worst, that is pulling us away from the person that we're in the relationship with. But those are emotionally driven, right? They feel like it's what we need to do. They feel very automatic. So if my core belief is that I'm going to end up alone and I see my partner always on the phone and I interpret that as being rejected and disinterested and, stepping out on the relationship, it makes sense that my behavior is going to be disconnected, right? I'm going to want to shut down and isolate and withdraw to protect myself. I don't want to be hurt. It sounds terrible. None of us do. And so that disconnection, unfortunately, leads to more disconnection. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. But when we think about alternative actions, what is the opposite of this? What else could we be doing? Those reappraisals really inform us being more connected. So if we're giving the person the benefit of the doubt, if we're open to the fact that our automatic assumptions about their behavior aren't necessarily the only possibility, we can ask for clarification. We can express what that brings up for me. We can communicate our needs and need for clarification or expectations. And we can co-regulate through connection, holding hands, physical touch, things along those lines. So when I think about emotion-driven behaviors and alternative actions in the context of romantic relationships, it's the difference between disconnection and connection. I will say these alternative actions are not easy to do. Communicating when we are distressed, expressing how we feel, setting boundaries, physical co-regulation or emotional co-regulation, and asking for clarification are really hard to do. But we do it because on the outside, our partners are only able to read the information that they get. So if they're only seeing shutting down, isolating, withdraw, lash out, distract, assuming the worst, they're going to see you as disconnecting, which may result in them disconnecting too. And before you know it, you got two people who are pretty darn disconnected. And my core belief of dying and ending up alone is actualized. Well, shoot, that's not really what I wanted. But I do want to acknowledge, while it feels like it protects us, it feels like it takes care of us, it feels like it's the appropriate response, the emotion-driven behavior of disconnection can ultimately be the thing that wears on the relationship, which is why we want to push ourselves towards connection through communication, expressing, setting boundaries, co-regulating, and asking. When it comes to communication in romantic relationships, John Gottman and his wife, Julie Gottman, are, top researchers and have some of the, most impressive research about how to work through relationships, especially when it comes to conflict and communication. So highly recommend that if you feel inspired post our conversation today, that would be a great place to start in terms of your Amazon search for more reading materials. That Dr. John Gottman has a ton of good stuff about relationship. I think the piece that I put on here that I wanted to really underscore is that goal of conversation is only to understand, not to problem solve. So in this situation where, our core beliefs influence how we see the situation, we want to disconnect, but hey, I'm going to try to push myself to connect again instead. The goal of communication is to understand each other, not necessarily to fix the situation. It doesn't mean that person has to put their phone down all the time. It doesn't mean that they have to respond to text messages in under 2 minutes or else. It means that we want to understand each other. I don't respond to text messages right away because I have the type of job where I can't be distracted. I'm in session. I can't do that. That doesn't mean I feel any less about the person, but I need to set that expectation for them, right? And if I don't communicate that, I just seem like I'm blowing them off. Communication is to understand, not to solve. And here are the ways that we can communicate. This first skill is that we want to put our feelings into words. We want to use I statements. We want to say, this is how I feel. That is so vulnerable and hard, but it's what we need to do in order to open lines of communication. I think having a soft startup versus a harsh startup, which is also a Gottman concept, is really, really important. If we start the conversation with you do this and you do that, shut down. I know I do. But if I hear the conversation starting with, I've been feeling this way, the story that I'm telling myself about this situation is this. Can you give me more information? Is that what's happening here? I'm feeling really hurt. I'm feeling like I'm not a priority. That's a very different conversation than you are on your phone too much. We want to also ask open-ended questions. What's going on for you when I see that happening? Like, why have you been so? I feel disconnected. Is that really what's happening here? Do you feel like you're pulling away? Is that what's happening? Tell me more about what your experience is. Tell me more about how you're feeling. Asking open-ended questions. And then we want to express empathy. Just like we want people to say, I see you, I hear you, and I get it, we need to reciprocate that too. Again, to open these lines of communication to encourage connection versus disconnection. Especially in eating disorder recovery, I think the thought about disclosure and asking for help is an important aspect of romantic relationships. I get a lot of questions about, when do I disclose my eating disorder or history? Do I ever? And how do I let my partner know that I'm struggling? Because I'm so afraid of what that means for our relationship. I'm afraid that will make me unlovable. I'm afraid that they won't be with me through another round of treatment. I'm afraid of letting someone know I struggle with an eating disorder and having them reject me because of that. It's very, very vulnerable. And I think is a really important aspect at times for relationships, especially if keeping the eating disorder a secret is a part of what maintains the eating disorder. But I also understand that relationships have to feel like they're supportive in order to share this information and trust that it's going to be held in a space that's healing and supportive and not necessarily shaming. So I think there's a lot of themes there about privacy versus secrecy, about trust versus mistrust, and about being transparent in relationships versus feeling like I've had partners say, I just feel betrayed that this was going on and I didn't know about it. Why didn't they tell me? So I think that disclosure and asking for help, romantic relationships, again, can be a great place to be vulnerable, to share, and to get needs met, whether that's getting help professionally or getting needs met in the relationship to try to move things forward as well. But that process can be challenging too. And then a quick note on body image, because I'm sure there's been a lot of swirling around thoughts and questions about the body image aspect when we think about romantic relationships. I think body image and its connection to emotions is still so significant in this situation. So I think there's some misbelief out there that, if I just have the right partner, or if, I get a lot of validation, or if, there's some sort of like compliments, weight loss, physical intimacy, this belief that something external will heal body image dissatisfaction. And I'm here to say that that's just unfortunately not the case. It doesn't have to be something that is healed before you enter a relationship. And it doesn't have to be something that can't be healed through that process of being in a relationship. But body image is something that is an additional part of this emotional process that can be sort of worked through in the same perspective, but ultimately no amount of validation in a relationship or the right partner isn't going to heal that feeling. So in looking to wrap us up, our final takeaways from this afternoon: relationships are hard. for everyone, regardless of what you're bringing to the table. And they're so incredibly worth it. We just have so much research about how people who are connected and in relationship with other people are, feeling the benefits from it from a health perspective. I also want to put out there that everybody has stuff. Everybody going into relationship has stuff and are still lovable with their stuff. I also want to put out there that the skills that you have from treatment are totally translatable to relationships. I don't know that there was any brand new information today, maybe some of the Gottman stuff, but the majority of it was all rooted in things you learned in treatment through the unified treatment model. I also want to put out there that if you are in therapy right now for your recovery process, and you're not talking about relationships, bring it in. I think it's so important. There's so much work that you can do on an individual perspective that is so beneficial, but also talking about you in relationship to others, in relationship to romantic relationships is so important. And if you do find yourself in a relationship, couples therapy can be a great way to get this process started when it comes to wanting to open the lines of communication. If you feel like you're stuck in a pattern of emotionally driven behaviors and disconnection, couples therapy is a beautiful way to help bridge the gap, learn adaptive and healthy coping mechanisms and communication skills that can help relationships, foster and flourish. Couples therapy, I think, can sometimes feel incredibly scary, just like all therapy and all treatment probably has throughout the process. But it's so, so, so beneficial if you find that these skills and the skill set is really hard to bring into your own life without the support of a professional. There's tons of great couples therapists. There's tons of great workbooks, books, all kinds of resources. This could really be a piece that really adds to and kind of, brings your recovery to sort of like a different and greater level. So I am now going to pause and talk about any questions that you guys have. I'm more than happy to answer those to the best of my ability.
Ashley, thank you so much. I feel like this is such a helpful topic and something, everyone's dated or dating at some point in time in their life. And so I think it's something that is so important. And like you said, relationships are kind of like why we're here, and they come in so many forms. And so understanding, okay, how do I interact in these? How do I kind of show up is so important.
Absolutely.
So our first kind of question, it's kind of a multi-part, but how do we start to have that conversation with a partner and about our eating disorder? And when do we have that? Do I have to tell them everything? Do I have to kind of let them know right off the bat, first date, by the way, or is it something, that's a little bit more nuanced?
Yeah. I think it's very individualized. I do know folks that, through dating apps and that getting to know you process, even before meeting for the first time, do disclose because they want to take that anxiety and that element out of the equation and going on that initial first date, which of course is, very anxiety provoking in itself. I know others that hold it a little closer to the vest and show and bring that in once there's a level of commitment and vulnerability that's been exchanged. I think it's very individualistic. I think it's important though to always be asking ourselves the question of our intention behind why we're choosing what we're choosing. Are we choosing to hold on to this and keep this secret because we're ashamed? That's something we need to think more about. Are we holding this because we're afraid that we are, unlovable with it? And so we need to protect the other person and ourselves from that experience. Am I holding on to it and keeping it to myself because I am not sure I'm ready to give it up, or I'm worried that this partner will hold me accountable or have an eye on my behaviors in a way that makes me feel really exposed and vulnerable and uncomfortable. So the why behind the decision is what matters far more about when. And like I said, I've got people who disclose on the app and I've got people who, disclose that much, much later on. But I think the why just has to be something that feels like it's congruent and in line with your values and who you are and what you want from relationships.
And sorry, that intention piece is so important. What's motivating me to share or not share?
Absolutely.
What about Ashley, when it's a relationship, maybe the person knows about the eating disorder, but there's been kind of this pattern of them still either not meeting needs or struggling with that communication around the eating disorder. What would you suggest in those kinds of situations?
So yeah, I think that's pretty common in relationships that have had some longevity, that maybe they're aware, but they're still really struggling on how to be a support. And so that can sometimes send us back into those emotionally driven patterns of disconnection, right? Like but you don't necessarily do what I need. So let me go back to just taking care of and trying to handle this myself. I think that's a great place for some couples work in my experience. I think that's a great place to say, we're having a breakdown in communication and we've tried a lot of different responses, and maybe you go through a Gottman workbook first on your own before you go to couples therapy. But I do think that some sort of professional intervention or support can be really helpful to navigate some of those roadblocks where we feel like we're asking for what we need, we're not getting what we need, and that's causing more disconnection.
Yeah, I love that idea. Like not shying away from couples therapy, that like it's both of you or however many of you in this relationship. And so let's talk about it. Let's have that open dialogue.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on kind of if we're struggling with body image still? And I know you talked about this a little bit, but we're really struggling, and we've got kind of this idea that if I'm in a relationship, what if that gives me external validation and I kind of stop doing the work on my own to kind of accept my body? How do we kind of navigate that where, we don't want to stop working to accept our body on our own, and maybe we're ready to get out there and date, or maybe we're not sure.
Yeah. I think body image is such a lifelong experience. And I think, working on accepting, and not even accepting, but just being kind of neutral and tolerating who we are and what the vessel is that we're navigating this world in through, I think is a really important piece to be consciously working on. And I think is probably a process of most people in relationships, especially with aging and all of the messages we get about that. So I guess I want to just encourage folks that, being in a loving and supportive relationship can help you feel more comfortable in your own skin, right? Like when someone else is showing and reflecting back to you that you are lovable, that you are, attractive, and that they find you interesting and desirable, that feels really, really good. But we also have to acknowledge that filling our cup that way can be really helpful and be really supportive. And we still want to make sure that we're integrating those messages into how we feel about ourselves. If there's a disconnect between those two, that's probably a sign that there's still some more work to be done, because we don't want to add that vulnerability of I need someone else to reflect this back to me to feel okay. It may be part of the process, it may help, but it can't be our end destination.
I think that's such a good way to think of it, Ashley. Like, okay, I can put myself out there even if I'm not totally there yet, because this can be beneficial, and it can help me get there, and I just can't look at it as my only lifeline.
Exactly. Well said.
I loved, I saw something one time that was like, well, how am I supposed to love myself if I haven't experienced love from somebody else? Like it's a skill. I might not even know how to do it. So that idea of the kind of the duality, the needing to do both at the same time.
Yeah. I think there gets to be a point where you can only do so much work and you can do a lot of really great work individually, and you can do it for decades, honestly. But I think that you get to a certain point with that individual work that if you don't then do therapy while you're also in relationship and navigating being in relationship, I think there's so much that's brought up, as we saw trauma and unhealed attachment wounds, show up. Those are just two of the many things that can show up in relationship that just don't show up when we're single. When we're on our own, we're doing our own thing, we're living our lives. It's a very different experience than when we're trying to connect and get mutual satisfaction in a relationship. So I do think that there's so much therapeutic value of being in therapy while you're navigating relationships, because it does just bring up parts of you that you haven't had to encounter yet.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Ashley, I know we're a little bit over time. So if anyone has extra questions for Ashley, or you think of something later, please feel free to email us at alumni@renfrewcenter.com, and we will get those over to Ashley. But for now, I would like to thank you so much, Ashley, for presenting on this topic today, and thank all of you all for joining us. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.